When I was first diagnosed with it, obviously you're going to Google it. You're going to go, what the hell is this? Please someone tell me something good. Everything online was negative. Everything was terrifying. It was all people with borderline personality disorder are evil and they're bad and they're going to be narcissistic and manipulate you and do all these things. And I was just like, oh God. And even I had a lot of doctors say to me, it's incurable. You're never going to live a good life. And I was, because I'm stubborn, I was like, yes, I am.
So I wanted to touch quickly on mental health aspects then, because you've mentioned depression a couple of times. Is that something you've always battled with, or?
It's a really weird one because I always thought of myself as just a really happy person, and I've always been really confident, and I've always been bouncy and able to make friends and put myself into anything. And then, like I said, when I look back, that depression was obviously under the surface somewhere, but I was never really taught how to use my emotions or how to deal with anything. So any negative emotions were always just shoved to one side. And I was like, we'll just leave that there, we'll ignore it. And then suddenly, when I was 21 and I'd moved to my third uni, so the first one I dropped out, second one I did foundation art and design, and then I ended up at Nottingham. And in my first year, I remember I had gone into a seminar and I suddenly found myself, I was unable to hear and I couldn't really speak and I was panicking and I was sort of thinking, okay, everyone can see me. Okay, maybe everyone can't see you. Is everyone ignoring you? And then and it's like my whole senses just shut down. And I remember I went to the doctors and she was like, oh, so yeah, you've got anxiety. And I remember telling a couple of people then, they were like, no, you don't. You're not the type of person to have anxiety. And because at that time, it would have been, yeah, when I was 21, so it would have been 2011, something like that, 2010. It wasn't really talked about. So it was kind of like, I don't know what this thing is. But everyone always made out that mental health was people in like an asylum somewhere. So you kind of think, this doesn't make sense to me. I don't know what's going on. And then over the years, I'll touch on it more, but over the years, I've since been diagnosed with borderline personality disorder, complex post-traumatic stress disorder, and then more recently, OCD on a kind of perfectionist scale. So
That's a lot of diagnoses.
yeah, I've got the whole alphabet.
So do you feel having these? So obviously you're going through life, you're experiencing emotions. You may not necessarily be aware of what you're experiencing. You're just experiencing things. Do you feel having these diagnoses helps you identify your behavior or what you're feeling, why you're feeling, and manage it better? Or
So much. I think there's a real stigma around getting a diagnosis because people think, oh, you get a label and then you've got an excuse to not do anything. And I know a lot of people, especially quite a lot of medical professionals who are reluctant to give diagnoses because they don't want to put people in a box. But for me, to be able to look at something and go, oh, I'm not crazy. That's why I'm doing that. Okay, now how can I tackle that? How can I then break this down to then, like I said, relearn everything again? So for me, it first and foremost became focus on just getting through everyday life and identifying and learning why my behaviors are a certain way. Then it became more about a recovery. And now it's much more about prevention because I've learned what I started doing, then I learned how to recover from that. And now I can learn how to prevent that from happening. And I've always said it's diagnoses for me are very much an explanation for my behavior. They're not an excuse. So I still take responsibility for however I am or whether I'm behaving negatively or however extreme I can get. I will sit there and I will assess it and think, okay, how could I have changed this? How could I have changed that? So yeah, for me, it's been life changing to know why my brain is doing certain things.
so, okay, let me remember these letters: CPTSD, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so I'm aware of PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder. So the complex aspect. Well, just define what this is.
So in layman's terms, complex post-traumatic stress disorder is more of an amalgamation of numerous traumas over the years that equate to the same kind of aftermath as how you think of someone with PTSD. So, for example, I get quite a lot of trauma nightmares. So I will get nightmares where I'll remember my dad dying again and it will be distorted, or I'll have nightmares about being homeless again, or I'll have them about people in my past, so friends that I'd fallen out with or my immediate family. And even just there are smaller things as well in everyday life that will set me off. So sounds and smells that remind me of people from my past who have maybe treated me negatively and caused trauma towards me in an emotional sense takes me straight back to that childlike state where I think, oh my God, I'm unsafe here again. So I think a lot of people, when it comes to PTSD, they think of sort of somebody in a car accident or somebody who was in the military and they've gone through a bomb blast. And it's the outcome is similar in terms of things triggering you, but it's a very different type of diagnosis in terms of how it's been caused. So
So how do you manage that aspect?
I've literally just finished a therapy called dynamic interpersonal therapy, where we did 18 sessions altogether. And it was just me one-on-one with a therapist, where we looked back at my relationships and friendships and how I was with my family when I was younger and compared it to now to learn why I respond negatively or why I panic in certain situations. So, for example, I really struggle with discussing money and I get really panicky that I'm going to end up with nothing because obviously after my dad died, suddenly everything was gone. I had no money, I had no home. So even though we're in a stable environment now, I will still convince myself your house could be taken away from you at any moment. You could lose everything, you could lose your friends. So I have to learn to reel myself in and be like, right, these are different scenarios. It may feel the same, but that doesn't make it the same. And also, what was really interesting that came from it is that I never realized that I was really ashamed of my inner child. And that sounds really like hippy dippy and whatever else. But I've learned to not kind of shove her to one side because I used to be, I'd get into quite like a childlike state where I'd sit there and I'd be like, oh, I'm a rubbish adult and I can't function and I'm useless with money and I don't know what I'm doing. And then now I can sit there and go, you don't have to feel like a perfect functioning adult all the time. Sometimes you just need to comfort yourself. And because I don't have a parent there to comfort me or anyone who I feel I can 100% trust in that type of parental role, I've had to learn to comfort myself that way. So that was a big thing for me with the trauma is just learning to talk to myself a bit, kind of.
Mm. So what do you tell your inner child?
Um, I think I kind of just I think of how I would be as a mum, or I think of my inner child as a separate entity to me, rather than because before I would judge that part of me because I thought it was me. And now I think back and I kind of thank her because she got me here. And I think that's incredible for a child, a young teen, early 20s, all the stuff that terrified me and getting bullied and losing my dad and all these things that it's that person. I think back to who I was and she was so scared but didn't give up. So I kind of try and give myself a bit more credit and just sort of be like, actually, well done. Like we've got this far. So yeah.
I think that is the most underrated thing. People, I think, often don't appreciate how far they've come, and they lose sight of the now,
Yeah.
without realizing the process and the progress. Even if it's one step every year, you're still moving forwards. Um, I think even I struggle with that even sometimes, and you just have to just pause and be like, actually, this, and see where you are now.
One of the things I think that's helped me the most is just it's very similar to what you were saying about just taking that one step. Everybody always sort of goes, oh, I've taken one step forward, however many back. I've learned to think about it more in terms of, as cliche as it sounds, of mountains. So,
Mm,
like when you feel like you've gone backwards, it's actually just that you overcame that last mountain and you're just at the foot of the next one to
yeah,
climb. So then it makes, because I'm a very visual person, it makes me think, okay, actually, no, you haven't gone backwards. You've just done that bit and now you're doing this bit.
yeah,
And so then it doesn't, because before when I think I was going backwards, it would almost be like I took away from myself that recognition of success and achievement from before by thinking any future failures would remove the past successes.
mm.
So now it's kind of good to be able
No, that is
to,
an excellent analogy, actually.
It's good. It helps if you're a visual person as
yeah.
well. It helps to think, okay, no, it's fun. I don't go backwards.
Yeah.
Good.
I think like it makes me think of certain memes as well. Like I don't know if you've seen this one. There's a guy on top got digging for gold, and there's a guy below that's got to the gold. So the guy on top, he's turned back, and he was actually this close to the gold.
Oh,
So
I
it's like,
love that.
yeah, it's like
So just keep going.
yeah, basically, yeah.
Yeah.
So I guess we talked a bit about your CPTSD.
Yeah, complex PTSD. That's an easier way of saying it. Otherwise, there's
Yeah.
too many letters.
Yeah. But obviously you've also mentioned borderline personality disorder,
Mhm.
which is something also I've had a friend who had a diagnosis but never really discussed it. So
Mhm.
like what exactly is that?
Okay, so borderline's a really weird one because it's got so much stigma attached to it, but also I think there's like 9 main traits of it, which I can't reel off the top of my head. However, when you're diagnosed, you're supposed to tick off at least 5 or more in order to fit the criteria, meaning there can be something like 250 something combinations of different traits. So everybody who has borderline personality disorder could be totally opposite from the other person. So you could have 5 of one and 5 of the other, and these people only share one of the same trait. So it's quite an odd diagnosis in that sense where you can't really compare one to another. It's not like anxiety where there seems to be that flowing line that people seem to understand. The best way to describe it is it's an emotional intensity disorder. So, and I mean, the word disorder is strange to me because it's literally just my personality.
Mm.
So, unless somebody somewhere along the line has gone, this is a wrong personality. And it's like, well, no, it's just mine. I've just had to learn to get used to it in the same way that a child would get used to learning their own emotions. I've just had to do it a bit later. So, in a more scientific sense, your prefrontal cortex, where your logic is based, and your amygdala at the back, which is the old part of your brain where the fight and flight mode comes from. My because I wasn't really taught how to process my emotions as a child, my amygdala has become much stronger than my prefrontal cortex. So I struggle to bring logic into intense situations, which fires the fight and flight mode or freeze, and you get that real intense emotions in that panicky moment. So I have had to learn that what my brain is telling me isn't always correct. Sometimes I'm flying off the handle 0 to 100. And I don't really do it these days because, like I said, I'm much more able to prevent how I feel. But it's taken a long time to learn to introduce logic back into things, but then not go too far and be too logical. So I have to stay in that middle ground, which I think when I did therapy, it was referred to as the wise mind. So you manage to make the two bits meet. And the best way I can describe it as well is, so if you imagine you put a baby in a room, right, from the day it's born, this baby is fed and watered. That makes it sound like a plant, but you know what I mean? But you never speak to this child. So then the child develops a language of its own. And then say you suddenly go, right, you're 10 now, you can come out of this room, but you have to speak perfect English. And then people get cross with you because you can't speak perfect English, but you've developed your own language to be able to communicate. It's exactly the same with me with emotions. Nobody taught me how to use them. So I had to make up my own emotional language. So then what I had to do when I was, I think, so I was diagnosed with it when I was 25, I think, either 24, 25. And when I was 26, I had to do a 20-week emotion management course where I unlearned pretty much everything I knew about emotions to relearn it. And that's hard when you've got that many years under your belt of doing things the same way for a long time. So yeah, it's intense.
So there's something you touched on there, which is basically in your formative years, you weren't kind of taught how to use
Mhm.
emotions. So um, as you've kind of experienced or learned more about borderline personality disorder, so
BPD,
many
you got
letters,
it
so
there.
many
Yeah,
letters.
so many.
Have you come across kind of how it is people are taught emotions as children? Because for me, I guess to me it just seems so normal, if that makes sense. That it
Yeah.
wouldn't be skipped as a. So what is it that wasn't taught to you, and what it is that is taught to other kids?
Okay, so I came from a very stoic background. It was very stiff upper lip. We don't discuss problems. We don't talk about anything outside the family unit. We just, well, to be fair, we didn't really talk about much inside it. It was, you just kept going. It was just a case of like, keep on keeping on. And I think that taught me that the correct way to do things was that you don't really acknowledge your negative feelings. And when you have a difficult time, you just ignore it. You keep going. And then that's that. And it goes away. But it doesn't go away. It builds up and up and up. And then it explodes one day, which is what I found out when I was 21. In terms of how I feel, I guess it's difficult to understand how others learn it, because I guess for me, I've always been an emotional person. So I was more susceptible to exploding with all of this because I wasn't able to teach myself. And then there must be some kids out there who have taught themselves
Mm.
correctly without intense guidance. But so, for example, me and a friend were talking yesterday, and she's got 2 young children, and she was talking about how when they do something wrong, she'll sit with them and go, when you did this, it made me feel like this, and this is why we're apologizing. And also, what I've realized is other friends who've got kids, you'll sit, and even I'll do it with them, and I'll say, anger is a normal response. You're allowed to be angry. Just because you're a child, you don't have to be perfect. This is how we then express anger, and this is how we then recover from that.
Mm.
So I think because I was taught to shove everything down, anything that was actually a normal response, like sadness and anger and stress, I became really ashamed of it. So then when you're then ashamed of an emotion, you don't have that movement to sit and feel it and be angry and then learn to undo it. So yeah, I think it's definitely going to affect how I will parent my future children, because I'm going to make sure that I teach them emotions.
Yeah.
So
So is that therefore then affected your relationships with people around you?
yeah, 100%. I think the friendships that I had when I was younger were very much based around, we didn't really talk about anything emotionally. It was, we have fun, we party, we just do stupid things. And if anything ever gets a bit too serious, then we just go and do something more stupid, and then we ignore all of the feelings. And I think that's why I really struggled when my dad was dying, because suddenly I needed people around me who could give me that emotional support. And I didn't really have anybody around me who had that capacity in them. And it wasn't their fault. We'd all come from really similar backgrounds where you just get on with stuff. And if you express your emotions, you're called an attention seeker, or you're being selfish, or you're being difficult. And I think one of the things that I've identified with my therapist is that I, because I always felt like I had to almost pay my way in emotions in order to hear something back, I was never able to just express myself, and that's it. So even now, I struggle to express myself without then having to be like, "Oh, so how are you? Let me help you with your problems too." So, yeah.
So with borderline, I've lost my train of thought. So it's not so much something you get over. It's more something you, you kind of develop the skills to manage.
It's for me, it's like learning a language.
Yeah.
Like once you've learnt that, you can, yeah, forget a bit occasionally, and you might struggle with it if you haven't spoken it for a while. But if you practice it and keep working at it, you eventually pick it up and you become fluent in it. So one thing I found really distressing is when I was first diagnosed with it, obviously you're going to Google it. You're going to go, what the hell is this? Please someone tell me something good. Everything online was negative. Everything was terrifying. It was all people with borderline personality disorder are evil, and they're bad, and they're going to be narcissistic and manipulate you and do all these things. And I was just like, oh God. And even I had a lot of doctors say to me, it's incurable. You're never going to live a good life. And because I'm stubborn, I was like, yes, I am.
Mm.
So I think that's why I talk a lot more about it. But yeah, for me, it isn't that it's curable or incurable. It's just that you have to learn more about yourself, because I've just had to learn the things that most people learn when they were a kid. But if you said to a child, oh, you can't manage your emotions, you're never going to, that you wouldn't do
Yeah.
that. So why would people, or why would I say that to myself now?